let's start off this morning. Let's sing a Christmas carol, how about? We're going to do Deck the Halls, and it is the Mannheim Steamroller version, so it has some cool beat to it. So if you'd all like to stand up together with me and sing along, I would love it.
Beautiful singing. Wow. Okay, we're starting this day well. You can all have a seat. I'm going to just welcome you all right now. My name is Shad Groverland, and I'm the Associate Minister with Shad, my brother who's speaking today, and Jack. You have an amazing sermon in store, so I'm just stoked. It's really on that birth of Christ within, and the historical story and the metaphorical story of the birth, and how we apply that into our lives. It's so applicable, and it's such a beautiful vision to have an ideal to connect with that potential, that beautiful potential that lives within each and every one of us. So I'm stoked for you to hear him. And then I also want to take this chance to acknowledge anybody that might be visiting us from a different unity today. Is there anybody that's from another unity around the country? I know you're visiting from Santa Barbara, right? Okay, yeah, we met last week. Anyone else? Okay, are you visiting from a unity or are you new today? Houston, well, welcome. That's a big unity. Well, what's your name? Michael, well, welcome to Unity of Boulder. All right, who's new today? Okay, we got a new one right here. Keep your hands up, and we have a gift coming to you from our ushers and information about upcoming events. One of the most important events is our Christmas Eve services. There's going to be amazing music and dancing and singing and solos and you name it. So get your free tickets as you're leaving out in the lobby. And I hope you enjoy the service, and we will get some more singing going. Oh, no, we'll see Mike first.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Unity of Boulder. Going to start things off with a few quick
You're wearing
announcements.
that as a
As Santisha mentioned, we do have our Christmas services coming up on Sunday, December 23rd,
That's all. Just that in
and
the shirt.
Monday, December 24th. They are at they officially start at 6 p.m., but our choir is going to be caroling up on stage starting at 5:30. So come a little early and check out our carolers at 5:30. Get good parking, and you get your tickets for that out in the lobby or in the bookstore or online on our website, unityofboulder.com. Grab a few extra tickets to give to a family member or a friend who you haven't ever brought here before. This is such a good, fun night. We're doing a great show that we've never done before. It's going to be all new, so come check that out. But speaking of the Christmas show, we also do need ushers for either of the services, and we're having a pass-around sheet if you would like to sign up for that. It does have the times on it a little wonky. We are having a service on Sunday, December 23rd, but just an 11 a.m. service, and that's just a regular, normal Sunday service. Our Christmas shows are both at night at 6 p.m. So if you're up for that, please sign up. I'd like to have Norma come on out here to make an announcement about our annual gift drive.
Hi, this was a shield that was given to us by the Lakota, and it represents all of life, everything that was created by the Creator, that they honor and they did not worship, they honored as their brothers and sisters. Everything that was created is their brothers and sisters, and they believed in the Creator, the one Creator of all. And we are doing a fundraiser, which we have done for years and years and years, for the Wounded Knee Lakota Indians. And we have a list of food, and we've actually got some of the things already brought in, which are the paper plates, the cups, and napkins. So that's already filled. And just check it, because we're going to be doing the meal, Christmas meal, for all of the people at Wounded Knee. And it's always a great success. And then we'll be collecting gifts for the children. And there's a Christmas tree that's on the landing going down to the Sunday school. Just take one of those cards. It tells the name of a child, whether it's a male or female, and the age. And after you purchase the card and the gift and you wrap it, then put that card, tape it on top of the wrapping paper, and we'll put it under the tree. And then it'll go up. What is it, the 20th that's going? 21st? Okay, so we'll be having volunteers come and help put everything into boxes and mark them. And anybody that wants to help with that, just we'll tell you when we need you to come. But I thank you in the past, because it's always been a great success, and the people have such joy that are there, and they so are the sisterhood with us and the brotherhood. So thank you for all the years you've done this.
Thanks, Norma. The tree she's referring to, where the children's names are on it, in case you don't know, is if you go into the lobby out here and go down the stairs that way, there's a Christmas tree right down there at the bottom of those stairs, so please grab a name off the tree. We are having another event coming this month is we're having our winter solstice celebration led by Norma. That's Friday the 21st at 8 p.m. over here in Fellowship Hall, where we have we do singing, drumming, and chanting, and everyone can just come on in. It's a drop-in event. Also, our store is open right now on Saturdays. Usually it's closed, so if you're out shopping on Saturdays and you're looking for some Christmas gifts that you're not going to find anywhere else, and definitely not for the prices that we have over here, come drop in from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturdays, or during the week, Tuesday through Friday, from 9 to 4 p.m. And we have our drum circle tonight. That's another drop-in group that meets tonight at 7 over here in Fellowship Hall. If you have a drum, go ahead and bring it. But if you don't have a drum but would like to attend, we have a few extras, so just come on in. It's always a good time for everyone involved. And normally right now, I would be inviting someone out here to do a prayer. But today, I'm going to do it. So, so right now we would like to honor our Jewish members, congregants, and guests here at Unity of Boulder, as Unity here is all-encompassing. Right now is actually the last day of Hanukkah. We light our final of our 8 candles tonight at sundown. And a little bit about Hanukkah is it's really a celebration of when a group back about 200 BC, a group of Jewish rebels took back the city of Jerusalem from a Syrian leader named Antiochus IV. And he was not the benevolent leader that his father was. And through his leadership, the Syrians and the Greek took the city, decimated all the temples. And so Hanukkah is really the celebration of getting those temples back, specifically the second temple in Jerusalem, and then rededicating them. And the word Hanukkah actually means dedication. And so we light those candles because at the time, Syrian and Greek forces who took over the city, they were ruining all the oil that everyone used. They tainted the oil so it didn't burn very good that everyone used for these services and for the burning in all these ceremonies. And when they finally took back the temple and it was finally time to rededicate it, they only had enough oil to burn one day. And this is the part you probably all heard. They only had enough oil to burn one day. There was a ton of oil around, but it was all tainted. There was only just a little bit of good oil, but it burned long enough. It burned for 8 full days, long enough for them to find and procure enough oil to keep that menorah burning and keep in their tradition of honoring God through the lighting of these candles. So this is the prayer that we say on Hanukkah while we're lighting the candles. It's Hebrew, and it's Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech olam, asher kiddushanu, b'mitzvotav, vitzivanu, lahadlik ner, shel Hanukkah. And what that means is, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to kindle the Hanukkah lights. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who performed miracles for our ancestors in those days, in those times. Thank you.
So one of my favorite Christmas songs is Gesù Bambino, and I have asked Rick Patterson to join me to sing it for you today, and I hope you enjoy it. When blossoms flowered mid the snow upon a winter's night, was born the Christ, the Christmas rose, the King of love and light. The angels sing, the shepherds sang, the grateful earth rejoiced. And at his blessed birth, the stars their exultation voiced. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us
Again the heart with rapture glows to greet the holy night that gave the world its Christmas rose, its King of love and light. Let every voice acclaim his name, the grateful chorus from paradise to earth he came, that we with him might worship
So you will get to hear those beautiful voices in our Christmas Eve show. So don't miss that opportunity. Among many others and among the talent of this band, I'm talentless, so I will not be involved, but you'll have everyone else in the church, basically. How are we doing today? We're getting there. We're getting there. It took me about 4 years to train my congregation in Las Vegas to actually respond like they wanted to be there. So we're going to get there. To actually sound like you want to be here and you weren't dragged here by someone, we'll get there. So maybe 3 years from now, we'll nail it. But just so you know, what I'm expecting is they sound like you actually want to be here. Like, good, yeah, I'm pumped. So we'll just practice it once. You ready? How are y'all doing today? It's exactly what my dad sounded like at my soccer games. There we go. Who's that guy losing his mind in the stands? I go, I don't know. Just some vagrant who walked in. All right. Let's get going with our words of wisdom. He who has not Christmas in his heart will never find it under a tree. Said by Roy L. Smith. Do you feel like that's timely for how we celebrate the Christmas season today? I feel like it is. All right, this Sunday what we're going to do is going to be quite a bit different than what we normally do. And it's going to be somewhat of an interactive game that we're going to play. And it involves some trivia that's going to primarily be based on a photo that's up on the screen, which means you will have to be able to see the screen. So if you cannot see the screen, if you cannot read this and you don't know who that is, you should probably move closer to the screen. I couldn't get a single person in the first service to get out of their seat and actually come closer to the screen, and they all thought I was joking. I'm actually asking, if you cannot see this and cannot read this, you should come closer to the screen. So, but it's on you. I can't force you to do it. I didn't force you to come here either this Sunday. So moving on. All right. So we are going to be doing a bunch of stuff on the screen. And if you see anyone who has better eyesight than you, just push them in the back and move forward at any point in time. That's fine. Okay, let's get started. As you may or may not know, there's a lot of fallacy and misinformation surrounding the Christmas story, or what we call the nativity story, the story about the birth of Jesus and how this whole thing got started. And some of it actually stems from the fact, or much of it actually stems from the fact that most of us probably have not actually read the Christmas story as is written in the New Testament books of Luke and Matthew. So that's kind of a big problem. And before I get far into this process, I kind of want to just see what my demographic is here. So I'm going to ask you, raise your hand if you know the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. I actually need to see. Come on, keep those hands up. We're working at about 60% here. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, because I'm going to help you understand that. So those of you that raised your hands, you're now going to be tested on the Old Testament and the New Testament in a game I like to call Old or New. I'm going to put up a picture, and you're going to tell me whether it's from the Old Testament or the New Testament. So here we go. Old Testament, that's correct. New Testament, yes. Yeah, I like how some of you wait a little while to hear everyone else answer, and then you pipe in. You're like, old, okay. How about this? That's right, Jesus walking on water, New Testament. How about this? That's right, that's Samson snapping the pillars in the Philistine temple. How about this? Well, we wouldn't have Easter without what happened in the New Testament. So this is new. This is new. Now the next slide, we're going to have old and new, and you got to decide which one's which. See, some of you may not know, a lot of people refer to the Old Testament as the angry God and the New Testament as the loving God. So these kind of depict the two different gods we have in the Bible. God was much more vengeful and jealous and punishing in the Old Testament, and a lot more loving and fatherly and motherly in the New Testament. So that kind of breaks that down. All right, where's this from? Old or new? Coming up. The New Testament. All right, we're laughing, but this is going to help some of you who didn't raise your hand to have some clarity on what I'm talking about here. This is from the New Testament. It's not only just the birth of Jesus, but you might say that the birth of Jesus is the birth of the New Testament. It is the new part of the Bible. It's the last third of the Bible, you might say. So it starts that whole new section, the four Gospels. So we have some flaws surrounding the Christmas story, by and large part because most of us probably haven't actually read it in the Gospels where it's written. But there's also the fact that a lot of religious leaders are not willing to modify or update the story based on new information that has come out recently. And they're stuck into the old version of the story, and so it doesn't evolve with time. So if you think about it, after all, there have been thousands of historical discoveries surrounding this story since we had King James write his English translation of the Bible back in 1611. And the crazy thing is that that version of the Bible that was written in 1611 is still the top 3 versions of the Bible sold today. So we're talking about there's probably some outdated information in there from what we've discovered recently and what we know about the languages of that time. And one of the hot debates surrounding the King James Version of the Bible versus what we actually know today is based on the Greek word parthenos, which he translated into the English word virgin, referring to Jesus' mother, Mary, being a virgin. But the Greek word parthenos is actually referring to the Old Testament Hebrew word alma, which really means young woman, or even more specifically means a young woman who's of marrying age. So when we have that word being used in the Old and New Testament, it's actually just referring to a young woman of marrying age. So Mary was not a virgin as we use that term today. She was just a young woman of marrying age as a descriptor. So as we're reading it, we kind of understand how old she was, which actually at that time would be about 12 to 14 years old. It was a little bit earlier than we did things here. And there's other biblical evidence to actually confirm that Joseph was in fact Jesus' father, that there was not this crazy thing that happened with God putting this baby in Mary's belly while she was still a virgin. He was legitimately Jesus' father. It oftentimes refers to the lineage of Jesus through Joseph. It talks about the ancestry through Joseph, which would indicate Joseph was his father. If he was not his natural-born father, there'd be no point in the Bible talking about his lineage through Joseph, which it does on a few different occasions. So we can accept that Mary was not a virgin and that Joseph was actually his father, which makes Jesus no more a special son of God than any one of us who are children of God. So on that level, we can look and say, Jesus was born like we are. Jesus had just as much potential as we have, and all these things create a level playing field between all of us. And so there's some updating that probably needs to be done on the interpretations of the Bible, as well as how we share the story with each other and how it is marketed throughout our society. But let's go on with our myth-busting game, and the core of our myths are going to be surrounding this picture right here. This is what you might consider to be the sort of average story we've all accepted that happened that night. It depicts all the major things that we attribute to the story from that night. But what we will discover as we go along is that it is not really all that accurate. It's a little bit off base. Speaking of inaccurate, can anyone see something that does not belong in this photo that I added? Okay, this is my last announcement. If you can't see Santa and his reindeer, you should move closer to the screens. All right, that should have been blatantly obvious to you. Now, I'm not saying Santa and his reindeer were not there that night. It was a very busy evening. Anything could have happened. He might have dropped off a few presents as he went by. It doesn't mention Santa being there in the New Testament, but maybe he was. I don't know. I'm not going to say. Okay, so let's move forward. Let's see if you can find this one. This is going to test your eyes again because I'm seeing we're still having people reluctant to move. See if you can see anything that's wrong with this picture. Okay, if you don't see an issue there, I'm just going to have to let you go. So now I cannot confirm or deny that there was an alien presence that night, but that's also possible. The New Testament does not mention that. All right, let's clear that out. So I'm going to point out some things in the picture, and then we're going to discuss what might be wrong with that. And we'll use some arrows here. So the first thing we're going to point out is this guy in the back. He clearly photobombed this shot. He was not supposed to be there that night. This is Carl. He was known throughout the area as a chronic photobomber. So that's the issue there, first one. The other issue we have is this. You'll see that these are presumably the presence of gold, frankincense, and myrrh brought by the three kings. And the issue I have here, and you might think this is a trivial point really to point out, but the issue I have here is that the gifts are not wrapped. I think that's somewhat disrespectful to show up to a birthday without wrapped presents. And if you look at the expression on Jesus' face, it says very clearly that he feels disrespected by it, and that expression matches one other expression I've seen before. Don't you see the similarity there? I mean, look at the eyes. Very similar in what's going on. All right. Well, what about this? So we got the red air there, pointing to what the shepherd's holding. Does anyone know what that is called? Not yet. Shepherd's crook. That's right, that is a shepherd's crook. Do you know what it was used for? Yes, it was one used as a staff for walking. Two, it was used as defense against predators. And the third was to grab sheep or cattle as they would go astray, grab them by the neck and pull them back into the herd. So it's a very useful tool. The reason I point it out is I feel like it's a very inappropriate gift for an infant. It's probably very dirty, among other issues. So we have one last issue to point out here, and the fact that this guy did not bring a gift at all. He was likely not invited to the next birthday party. Probably hanging out with the guy in the back there photobombing later on. Anyway, the last thing I want to point to, and I think this is very crucial, does anyone recognize the star who's playing Joseph in this shot? Does anybody recognize this famous person? I'm going to help you out. I saw it right away. This is very obviously a young Phil Collins. I mean, come on, look at the resemblance. You can't tell me that's not him playing that role. He posed for that picture. Okay. All right. We're going to try to get serious now. I'm having a lot of fun here at your expense, but we're going to get serious. All right. There is something wrong with this. Does anyone know what's wrong with that? I mean, can you see what that is, first of all? Tell me what that is. It's a crown. Does anybody know what's wrong with that? The thing that's wrong with that is that the New Testament never mentions them being kings whatsoever, or even infers that they were kings. And we're going to look at what was actually said in the book of Matthew regarding these characters. We have Matthew 2:2. It says, "In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem." Wise men. Doesn't say kings, just says wise men. And wise men was actually translated from the original Greek, which was magoi, which we know today as magi, or we pronounce as magi. And the magi were the people from the ancient land of Medes, which is modern-day Kurdish people in the Middle East. So they were actually the original magi, the modern-day Kurdish people that we have today. So there's a neat aside here about the magi that many people don't know. Well, first of all, did you know that the Bible mentions nothing about Jesus from the age of 12 to 30? You aware of that? So these are called the missing or the lost years of Jesus. The Bible sort of gives us a narrative up to 12, then there's nothing, and then voila, he's 30, and he's back, and he's spiritually evolved. So these 18 years are missing from his life. But there's evidence to support that Jesus actually left his family and his hometown at age 12 because there was an arranged marriage that he did not want to partake in. And that was about the time, the age at 12 years old, that the arranged marriage would have happened. And that he then likely traveled on the Silk Road and went east, seeking spiritual teachers, spiritual enlightenment, spiritual masters at that time, at that age, and traveled for many years. And as he traveled, if you're trying to look up or you want to research that for yourself, he was going under the name of St. Isa, is what people in the East were calling him at that time as he traveled. I bring this up not because St. Ice is important, but because there's a funny part to this story. As Jesus continued his travels, he actually wound up in the land of Medes, the land of the Magi, when he was about 20 years old. And as the story goes, he was still traveling out. He winds up in Medes, and he was only there for a very short while before they kicked him out of the city and locked the doors behind him, because what he was teaching disagreed with their religion. So I think it's kind of fascinating that they were there at the birth to welcome him, and then in his 20s they booted him out, which is not unlike what modern parents have to do today. Some people aren't laughing because it's hitting way too close to home. So you might wonder, why do we call them kings? Why have we always called them three kings? Why do we put crowns on them in these pictures? Well, it actually comes from an Old Testament prophecy of the Messiah, of how the Messiah would come. And it says that kings would be bowing before the Messiah and offering gifts. So that when these people showed up offering gifts, they said, oh, these must be the kings that were prophesied in the Old Testament. But yet, the New Testament doesn't say anything about them actually being kings. So, not kings, no reason for a crown. So let's get to the next one here. These are the shepherds. We've all heard the shepherds came once Jesus was born. They came to pay homage, to say hello, to hand weird presents to them. And the thing that's wrong with this, does anybody know what's wrong with the shepherds being there in this picture? I know these are very obscure questions, so I'm not expecting any answers. I'm kind of just helping myself feel better about what I know. They're not supposed to be in this picture because they were not there when the Magi were there. They were not there at the same time. So we have to look at this historically, and we realize that they did not share the same space at the same time when they visited the baby. What happened was, if you think about it, the Magi were following a star. And following a star is not as accurate as following GPS. I don't know if you've tried that. It's a little bit different. So they actually got a little bit lost along the way. And we don't necessarily always hear that in the story, but they did get a little lost along the way. And they actually stopped at the temple of King Herod and actually asked him, do you know where the newborn king is? Can you help us find the newborn king? Because they knew he was born in his land, so surely he must have known about this. Well, if you are the current king, and someone comes and asks you if you know where the new king has been born, and it's not your son, you're usually not too happy about that. So what he said is he sent the Magi on their way. He didn't know where the newborn king was. He sent them on their way, but he did say, when you find him, please let me know where he is. But the Magi were very wise folks, and they knew that he had some ill intentions for Jesus if he did find Jesus. So they actually, when they found Jesus, they actually snuck away at night so that no one would see them leaving, and they never reported back the location to King Herod. And this is what is said in the Bible at that point in time from Matthew 2:16. When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he was infuriated, and he looked for children in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the Magi. So from this we know when the Magi came to Herod, they must have told him they were looking for a child about 2 years old. That's why he puts out this edict. So their arrival was actually about 2 years after the birth of Jesus. So they would have not have been there this night at the birth. They would actually show up about 2 years later. Which brings us up to another point. We've always heard three kings, 3 wise men, 3 magi. There they are, 1, 2, 3, with their servants with them. But as we saw earlier, the Bible simply states wise men. It never mentions how many wise men were there. But yet we've always come to this number of 3. Well, there's actually several cultures that say there were 12 wise men, 12 magi that were there. And there's actually tombs and sarcophagi for 12 different burials of these magi that you can visit in Europe. But there is no indication of how many were there. The only reason we've come up with this number 3 is because of the gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. We figured 3 gifts, 3 people. Sure, that's logical. So for hundreds of years, we've always said 3 kings, 3 magi based on that simple fact. Isn't that crazy? A lot of this stuff I just find crazy as you discover that we made these grand assumptions about one of the most famous evenings of all time. We've just made these grand assumptions and all just sort of gone along with it, but it's never actually backed up anywhere. This is also interesting. I don't know if you can see the blue arrow there, pointing at a camel who's hanging out in the back there next to the photobomber. In almost every depiction we see of the 3 kings or the wise men, we see them with camels, either riding camels or pulling camels behind them or sitting by the manger with the camels. But the Bible doesn't mention any camels either. There's no mention of camels. It actually does mention some other animals are there, but it does not mention any camels. And in fact, the magi of that time from that region didn't ride camels. They walked everywhere they went. So it's most likely that they walked to that place, and they did not ride camels because that's not what they would have done in their culture at that time. And so they were following a star, but we have Google Maps. So roughly the region that they would have started from is actually Baghdad in Iraq, and they would have ended up in the Bethlehem of Galilee, which we still have today. And their journey would be 1,050 kilometers walking, which Google Maps obliged me with by showing me. It would take 212 hours to walk that distance. So we can say that was about the journey they did to make it to that location. Now, if you're following a star, we assume then you have to be traveling at night, right? And it's only dark for about 12 hours during a day, so that means they could only travel for about 12 hours a day in order to be able to follow that star at night. But we also know that you always have to stop for potty breaks and roadside junk food anytime you're on a road trip like that. So you're going to knock off about an hour, so we're going to say they're traveling about 11 hours a day to make this journey. So in all, that would take them about 19 days to do that walk. If you're ever wondering how long they were traveling to get there, it was really only 19 days, and they had potty breaks and snacks, so that's not too bad. All right, we're going to reset this image again and go in a little bit deeper on what's wrong with it. Now, we've all heard that Mary and Joseph couldn't find a place to stay. Right? There was no room at the inn. We've heard that, and they were forced to stay in like an animal stable is sort of what we've been told, these sort of unwelcome circumstances. So this is what we're looking at. We have this sort of animal stable represented here. So let's bring this up in the book of Luke. This is Luke 2:7. And she gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in bands of cloth and laid him in a manger because there was no place for them in the inn. Well, the original Greek word which we translate as inn in English is kataluma. And a kataluma actually more closely translates to a guest room. There was no guest room available for him. If you're going to read that, because there was no guest room for them. Well, the Bible never actually mentions an innkeeper or an inn. And as was customary at the time, everyone had to go back to their place of birth for the census. So that's why we have Mary coming with Joseph back to Bethlehem for the census. That means all of Joseph's relatives who were born in that area had to come back to Bethlehem at that exact time for the census. And as it was culturally done, everyone would have stayed at the family home, the primarily family home of the parents of the family. So if you imagine every single one of the cousins and uncles and aunts and everyone came back at the exact same time, that house was probably pretty full, and there probably was no guest room available for them to stay in. Do you think that they would have kicked him out into some shack on the outside of town and said, go give birth out there and just let us know when you're done. This is weird. We don't want to be a part of that. That doesn't really make logical sense at the time. He's in his hometown. His whole family's there. You'd think they'd want to be a part of it. Well, what we know is that the kataluma, or what wasn't available, but what was available is in the houses of that time, they had a lower chamber or a basement on the house that was open to the fields, so that at night they could bring the cattle in to protect them and keep them warm. So there was no guest room available, but there was room in the basement, down where the cattle and everything comes back in. That way they would be safe, they'd be warm, and they'd still be in the family home. So Jesus would have been, in fact, born in a manger. It would make sense. Do we know what a manger is? Does anybody know what a manger is? First service knew. Don't make them look smarter than you. It's a trough. It's a feeding trough. It's what you feed your cattle out of. It's just a trough full of hay. So it would have made sense that there was a manger back down in there for the cattle to come back in and eat at night when they were in there. And Jesus would have been born in a manger. But I imagine the family would have come down and prettied it up a little bit for them, would have been the process. So that appears to be what really happened. They were just in the family home. There was no guest room, and they stayed in the basement where the animals were because of the census. So now here comes an obvious one. I'm going to see if you can catch this. The first service did not. What's the issue here? Yes. Mary and Jesus were not fair-skinned Europeans. That should be an obvious one to all of us. Do you think there might have been some racial and societal bias going on with the painter in this depiction? I think so, which actually brings me to my next point here. Where are the women? This is like a really bad party at CU. It's nothing but dudes. You've been to those, come on. Horrible, horrible. Where are all the women? Actually, after the first service, someone came up to me and said, I would not give birth to a room full of dudes. It's like, that makes sense to me. So let's bring this up. This is actually a fascinating read. This is from the National Catholic Reporter. They did some research into this matter, and they're speaking to this whole topic, and they say, Matthew is the only gospel that says anything at all about magi. You may be surprised to learn that this gospel does not ascribe a number, gender, or royal status to the wise ones from the east. Matthew's use of the Greek masculine plural magoi for magi can be used inclusively, just as the English word men often includes women. Scholars tell us that the magoi were a caste associated with the interpretation of dreams, astrology, Zoroastrianism, and magic. Zoroastrianism, man, I've tried to say that so many times this week to get used to it. Zoroastrianism allowed women to serve as priests, and in ancient Persia, there were female astronomers and rulers. So there's no reason to think that the Magi were not at least partially some women, possibly even all women who made that journey. Now this actually goes on to say that the male Magi would never go visit a woman without female Magi with them. It was culturally unaccepted, especially if they're going to visit a woman without a man present. And in the Bible, when the Magi arrive, there's no indication that Joseph is around. It just mentions that Mary and the baby are there to welcome the Magi. So it would have been beholden and incumbent upon them to travel with Magi women to be a part of this experience. So for the very least, there had to have been women there, if not mostly women, if not some of the actual leaders of the group making that journey. So there's a lot we can go into that picture, believe it or not. We can just keep going and going with all the things that are off base and inaccurate. But last week I said we would have some sort of message today, so now I have to struggle to try to come up with something. If we are willing to step away from the literal concept of what happened that night and what led up to that moment and what came after that moment, we can find a deeper message that emerges from the whole process. And our co-founders, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, were masters at metaphysics, the deeper meaning of the things that we've had throughout history and what they're saying to us. And we actually have a book called The Revealing Word, which is a collection of these interpretations from the various events, figures, and places in the Bible. So this is the interpretation from Charles Fillmore, our co-founder of this movement, wise men. The wise men of the East who came to visit the baby Jesus may be likened to the stored up resources of the soul that rise to the surface when its depths are stirred by a great spiritual revelation. In scriptural symbology, East always means the within. We're going to take that again because it's a bit wordy. The wise men of the East who come to visit the baby Jesus may be likened to the stored up resources of the soul. So I want to go into that a little bit so you understand what we're talking about. We have a soul, each and every one of us. This soul is connected to the infinite, connected to all knowledge, all things, all abundance, all energy at all times. Would you consider that a stored up resource to draw upon? But as we live an ego-centered physical life, we cut ourselves off from the accessing that stored up resource because we get trapped in the physical and the desires of the ego and the body and the things of this world. So we have this untapped resource that sits there waiting for us to tap it. Jesus may be likened to the stored up resources of the soul that rise to the surface when its depths are stirred by a great spiritual revelation. In scriptural symbology, east always means the within. So we're talking about this birth, this whole process. There's a stirring up that's bringing this and opening up and cracking apart this barrier we've put in between us and the soul to release this information, this light, this energy, this power into our lives that should be there all along, but yet we've capped it off with our ignorance. We also have this interpretation of new birth, the awakening of man to a consciousness of his unity with the one universal spirit. Once again, the metaphysics of this time of year is our awakening, our rebirth into the understanding of the spiritual source from which we come. Unity has these tools to interpret all of these people, all these words, all these events, and you can take it deeper and deeper and deeper depending on how much time you want to invest and how deep you want to go. But what really moves me about this story is how real it is. Not the deeper message that's beneath it, but how real it is. Over time, the story has become somewhat of a fable that we just sort of share to each other around Christmas time as something that was sort of magical back then. And here we had this magical God that was planted on earth by this magical essence, and that this magical parents just happened to be chosen to have this magical birth, and then this boy was going to grow up to be able to do magical things that were unlike any of us will ever be able to relate to at any point in time. So it becomes this collection of unrelatable fantasy that just was this thing that people talk about, but it's not all that real, so we can kind of slough it off. There's no bearing on real life. It's not applicable to me. And so because we can sort of put it in the cupboard as fantasy, we can turn the holiday into an ego-centered, money-focused, gift-giving experience. Because we've separated the truth and the power that is in the realism of the story from what we're celebrating today. We put magical characters around it so it doesn't seem all that real, so we can turn it into whatever holiday we want and not feel guilty about how we're acting during that time, frantic and stressed out. And that is where the powerful story reveals itself to me. And the message that is so powerful for me is that it all actually happened. See, you get wrapped up in Christmas, but when I stop this time of year and I just sort of tap in and I go, this actually happened. Then I sort of get this butterflies in my stomach. And there's this awe. I'm getting it right now in the back of my head just talking about it. It's so cool. I got a tingle right up my spine. Thank you, Jesus. But if you tap into that, this actually happened. It wasn't made up by Hallmark. This actually happened. There is so much power in that. I'm not talking about the overly glamorized, magical events that most of us talk about at Christmas time, year after year, just to grab our attention. But the very real struggle of a very real couple giving birth to this real child in what was not the best of circumstances, in not the best of a society as we had it at that time, but yet this child grows up in these real circumstances to do unreal things. That just puts chills up my spine. It takes it out of the fantasy of this doesn't apply to me and makes it very much real for me right now. It is the realness of the story that grabs my heart and grabs my attention. Mary and Joseph were not just these country bumpkins who were granted this special gift from God, but that's kind of how it's given to us throughout time. But there is good reason to believe and to recognize that they were a part of the Essene community. This is the same community that brought us the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is actually the community that we can thank for much of what we have from the Bible, because they were the scribes that wrote it down year after year and preserved it in the jars that in ossuaries we found in the Essene community. This was a very evolved spiritual community. This is not fiction. Archaeologists know this as a fact. They were there in that region. There is very good evidence that Mary and Joseph were connected to this, and they would have been raised in this community and been spiritual people themselves, and therefore would have raised their child in a very spiritual environment, giving him the chance to live a life that has been rarely seen on this planet. It's not fantasy. It becomes very real to us. Jesus was not handed his special spiritual gifts at birth. He was trained into them as he was growing up, trained by his parents, and he'd have to practice them, and he'd have to work, and he'd have to study, and he'd have to grow. And the Bible even talks about by age 12, he knew the Old Testament better than most of the priests that were in the temples, because he was studying, and he was growing, and he was learning, and he was applying what he learned. And there was no need for a physical magical star in the sky. I know that people talk about astrologers have gone back and there was this alignment of planets and there actually probably was a bright star in the sky. But if you think factually, if I'm standing here and there's a bright star, I'm walking away. And if you're standing there and there's a bright star, you're walking towards. So none of us will wound up at the same location if we're all following a bright star. It doesn't make logical sense. But the masters of the East talk about the third eye, or the spiritual eye, that appears as a five-pointed star in our sight when we are in tune with our higher consciousness. It actually appears in our visual cortex as a five-pointed white star when we are tuned with our higher nature, or what in unity we call our Christ consciousness. And the Magi, being from the East, practitioners, spiritual people themselves, following a star in the sky, following their own higher awareness, their own intuition, spiritually evolved people feeling that something powerful is happening on the planet and being called to a location. Does that not make more sense to you? Does that not seem very real? It's happened throughout time many times, people being called to a location because of a higher awareness calling. And we often forget, which is crazy to me, that happening at the same time as Jesus and Joseph and Mary and this whole thing is unfolding, Mary's cousin Elizabeth is also having a miraculous birth ordained by God. Did you know that? Mary's cousin Elizabeth was also visited by the archangel Gabriel, also told, you're going to have a miraculous birth. She was way older than the age she should have ever been able to conceive. Her husband was like 3,000 years old. You know how it went in that time. And they give birth to John the Baptist just months before the birth of Jesus. Two incredibly powerful spiritual people on the planet that came within months to two female cousins, who were also likely raised in the Essene community in the same spiritual principles, raising their son John the Baptist in the principles that Jesus was being raised with down the street, and that later they would meet, and they actually poke fun of each other in the Bible, at least the way I read it. When Jesus shows up and John the Baptist is there and he goes, oh, here he comes. Jesus, the special one. And that's beautiful. And some say that the relationship of these cousins, Jesus and John, actually happened several times over several lifetimes. through reincarnation. They have been working together to help this planet through several incarnations. And that's not something that's been made up just in the New Age. That's actually talked about in the Bible. It talks about the reincarnation of John the Baptist and previous incarnations in the Old Testament. But what really grabs me is that real people in very real circumstances going through a very real struggle created one of the most miraculous events that ever happened on this planet. That is the message that inspires me, because it is a message that I can relate to, and one that tells me anyone going through a struggle has the opportunity to do something powerfully spiritual on this planet. If I don't see that story as real, it does nothing for me. But as soon as I step into how real that story is, it becomes my story and your story and our potential of what we can do. And that's so awesome. Isn't that awesome? That's awesome. And that's the truth as I experience it. Let's take a little moment for meditation and practice what these people practiced. So I invite you to close your eyes, just let your shoulders relax. Drop into that center. Bring your attention to your breath. Allow yourself to have a very real experience right now. How much gratitude I have for these beautiful beings that came before me. From Moses to Lao Tzu, Buddha, Jesus, Mary, hundreds of others that paved a path of possibility. There is no one true path, one true religion. There is my path and my possibility for spiritual growth and awakening. And how do we honor these people that live these lives? But by recognizing them for what they are. Real people that rose above a real struggle to create an unreal experience and to send a message through time that hits us in the heart thousands of years later today. Each one of these masters is speaking to us through the words on these pages, calling us to rise above the nonsense, avoid the chaos, and tune in to what is possible. What a gift we have been given. Of all the things we're grateful for in this season, we have been given the gift of potential. We have been shown what is possible. We've been handed the tools. Why not try putting them to use? Why not this season share and experience authentic joy, authentic peace, authentic love? How better to honor those that came before us than using the tools they gave us and sharing the experience that became their life and their mission and their blessing. Let's just rest in that for a moment. This is a new birth. This is the time of year. We're actually supposed to be more focused on spiritual awakening than any other time of year. We will not allow ourselves to get sucked into the distractions. We will be our highest self as we go about this month and into this new year. And we are grateful for this blessing. And so it is. Amen.
Before we take an offering this morning, I need to share with you a sad but a beautiful moment. One of those people that has done what Shad was talking about, risen to the occasion of bringing her spirituality into practicality in our world. Was on our staff for 4 years and helped us amazingly move into the social media mix that you have to be in these days to advertise and care for an organization like Unity. And she's leaving us. She's taking another job somewhere. She's not leaving us completely, but you know her best for her singing. She is, for the last 9 years, she's been singing in our choir. She's done featured roles in our shows. She's just an amazing human being. And you see her around doing all kinds of things, taking care of our credit card gifts and tithes and things like that. So we've always been able to place this amazing person with all of this talent and ability to be part of whatever it is she's given to do in such a meaningful, spiritual way. We are really going to miss her on our staff, but I want you to acknowledge and give her a hug today for Sierra Samuel. Come on up here. Yeah, so?
You're not going to get rid of me that easily.
Okay.
I'm still going to be in choir. I'll be here on Sundays. My heart is here. The center is in my heart, so I can't leave because you're part of me. I love you all.
Right.
And thank you for so many years of reflecting back to me the person I always wanted to be.
Well, we're all blessed by this gal right here for being here. Yeah. So remember, give her a hug when you see her. Say hello. She's been great. Helped us in incredible ways.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. We will now take an offering for Unity. And for those of you that may not know it, each Unity church is autonomous. We don't have any mother church that feeds us money or we can go to borrow money. Everything that makes this place operate comes out of your gifts, your gratitude for what goes on here. And what goes on here is amazing because we are moving into areas of insight, truth, joy, healing. We're part of the grand vanguard evolving toward divine consciousness, the new heaven and the new earth. And Shad's talk today is so appropriate, taking us into the idea that there's actual historic characters rose to this higher level of awareness and were able to bring forth ideas and ideals that are with us today and will never leave us. So we should be very grateful for that. And I think we can take our offerings in our hands and let our gratitude for receiving that beautiful understanding go into our offerings. So with our offerings in our hands, let's bless them with this offering statement. Divine love through me blesses and multiplies all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive because I give. Together, please. Divine love through me blesses and multiplies all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive because I give. Okay. Okay, just a quick reminder about what we're doing here. We have a lot of stuff going on for Christmas, but a major portion of it is we want to fill that lobby with the goods that we're going to be sending up to Wounded Knee, to that community up there that really is in need of all the things that we have on that list out there. So we have a printed list, and you can pick one up. And also, stop down the stairs, just a few steps down over here, and you'll see a Christmas tree with tags on it, and it's got a name and a gender and an age on that tag. You can go out and buy a gift, wrap it up, and then paste that tag to the gift so we know the age, the gender, and we will send those gifts up to Wounded Knee, to children that will so appreciate. And we have in our fellowship hall the best goodies you're ever going to get. Tea, coffee, chai, whatever you want. So head over there, share with the ministers. They'll be over there to talk to you about anything you want to talk about, unity or the talk today. So let's just keep this beautiful energy going. Rise, face the center aisle, hold hands if you want, but and sing our closing benediction.
Try to have an authentic Christmas experience this year.